Thank you all for coming. We'll try to get you out of here before the weather gets too bad. But actually, if we don't, we're probably in one of the safest places we could be. We'll just go downstairs in the hallway and we'll hang out down there. We'll be safe. But thank you all. They're talking tornadoes and high winds and possible hail, and so about 7:30, 8 o'clock. So if you're watching online and didn't know that, just there could be coming, or it could not, I guess. Yeah. Hey, so we're ready for Psalm 55 tonight. This is in my Bible. I don't know if in your translation, if you have titles listed or not at the heading of chapters, but this one is entitled in mine, Trusting God Concerning the Treachery of Friends. And so this is an expression of David when he has had somebody very close to him betray him. And it's not 100% identified as to who it is. He leaves it anonymous. Several Bible commentators think that it's in reference to his son Absalom. When Absalom rebels from David, you can find that account in 2 Samuel 15 through 18. So you can read. We're not going to go back to all that and read that whole story there because it is quite lengthy. And it's not 100% confirmed that this is who he's talking about, because some of the language gets very strong, and so it's like, well, why would he say that about his son? Because when Absalom did die, even though it was in pursuit of his father, it broke David's heart, as it obviously it should. There is also, in connection with Absalom rebelling against David, there is one of David's men, or one of David's, I guess, what you would call a right-hand man, Ahithophel. Say that 5 times real fast. Ahithophel. He switched sides, so he betrayed David and joined forces with Absalom when Absalom was rebelling against David. And just a little bit of that story, what was happening was, Absalom was feeling cut off from his father, and even when if you go back and read the story, you won't even hear Absalom, or you won't even read Absalom referring to him as David or father or dad. You'll hear him say, well, the king. Well, can I see the king? He won't even say dad. But anyway, what Absalom would do is Absalom would just kind of stand outside the city gates, and as people would come, and he'd be like, well, what are you here for? And they're like, well, we got this going on, and I'm trying to deal with this and try to get this figured out. And Absalom was like, well, if I were king, if I were the man in charge, if I were the guy making the decisions, I would do such and such. And so what was he doing? Well, he's going against his dad, yeah. So it's basically like, yeah, he's campaigning, he's lobbying a little bit. Yeah, well, if I was the pastor, anyway, I would, so you can transfer it to whatever situations you want to. Transfer it to a workplace situation. Well, if I was the boss, here's what I would do in this situation. And there's people who do that, right? You've been around long enough to know there are people who do that. And it's sad that it happens, but it does. And so David is writing this from some form of betrayal from somebody very close to him. Now, here's kind of the other ironic, I don't know if ironic's the right word. Sometimes I don't pick the right words. So if you think of a better one, then throw it out there. But this is more than likely after the David and Bathsheba deal. And so what had David done? You remember we looked at that just a few weeks ago. Who had David betrayed? Had David not betrayed a close friend of his in Uriah? And so now here David is, so maybe would ironic be the right word there in that David is now like saying this about somebody close to him? But anyway, so all that to say, it will remain anonymous, and really for the big reason is because I think in some way everybody can connect with what David is expressing here from what he is going through and what he is dealing with. And just keep in mind too, and I was making a little reference to this Sunday when we were talking about forgiveness. Even when we're in a situation where we feel like somebody has treated us unfairly and they're the ones that are really more so in the wrong and should be coming to us and they're not, we're supposed to be the ones that are able to forgive, right? Regardless of how they are responding or reacting. And we're the ones also that are supposed to be taking from that experience any truth that we can learn, right? And how can I grow and how can I be better because of this? It's not I'm not going to stand here tonight and say, oh, it's an easy thing to do. You just need to, it's often very difficult to do. And so for sure, David is using this as something that, this is part of his growth, I'm sure, in walking with the Lord. Now, David is going to start out expressing an emotion of fear, an emotion of anguish. And then as it gets into as we go into verse 9, he is going to, his emotion is that of anger and fury. And if you remember, we've talked about it before, a lot of times anger is something that we use to mask what? Fear. Because we just try to think, well, I'm really afraid, but I'm going to speak in anger. So David speaks in a language of anger from like verses 9 down to verse 15. But then as he finishes from verses 16 to 23, he speaks from a heart of faith and a heart of assurance, knowing that regardless of what people around him may be doing or saying, God has got his back, and God is going to ultimately take care of him. Okay, so have you got those? Fear, fury, faith, or anguish, anger, assurance, however you want to try to remember it. But that's kind of the three segments that he's speaking from. So let's take it in those three sections and look at it. So verses 1 through 8. David says in Psalm 55, "Give ear to my prayer, O God, and do not hide yourself from my supplication. Attend to me and hear me. I am restless in my complaint and moan noisily because of the voice of the enemy, because of the oppression of the wicked. For they bring down trouble upon me, and in wrath they hate me. My heart is severely pained within me, and the terrors of death have fallen upon me. Fearfulness and trembling have come upon me, and horror has overwhelmed me. So I said, oh, that I had wings like a dove. I would fly away and be at rest. Indeed, I would wander far off and remain in the wilderness. I would hasten my escape from the windy storm and tempest. So hopefully it was pretty obvious there that David was like, the words horror and trembling and fearfulness. My heart is severely pained. There's just a lot of words there clear that David is expressing fear and anguish. And so his very first words, as so often are, is, please pay attention to me, Lord. And we've looked at this several times, and as David has expressed it so often, just again, please don't ignore me. And sometimes it does seem like, God, do you see what's going on? Do you hear what's going on? Or are you paying attention? Are you ignoring me? And so in some of those times when it seems very severe, it seems like God is very distant. And so he says, just please, don't ignore me now in this time. Now, notice how he expresses how overwhelmed he is in verse 2. He is restless. He is complaining. He is moaning noisily. It's just like, he's just like in pain inside, right? That this is hurting him, not really physically, but where is it hurting him? It's hurting his heart, isn't it? And so he is a place where he is just so overwhelmed, he cannot get any rest. And he says, why? Because of the voice of the enemy, because of the oppression of the wicked. Now, I could probably say this with some level of confidence. Have you all had anybody say anything about you bad this week that you know of? Anybody? Anybody? No? Not that you know of. Okay, well, good. That's what I was looking at. You've not heard, have you heard any voices? Any threatening phone calls? Voicemails? Emails? Texts? Nobody, Sandra? Nobody texting? Nobody calling, said, wait until I see you out next time, Sandra. I'm going to let you have it. Anybody? No? No oppression from the wicked? No? Okay. Intentionally? 3 pickup trucks ran the red light. Okay. Well, we're glad you didn't get run over. Okay, that is a little unnerving, but we don't live in the fear that David did, do we? That I'm aware of. Obviously those are, anxious situations and can be somewhat fearful, but nobody is hunting us down, right? We're pretty safe. But how about the voices from the ultimate enemy, Satan? Heard any of those voices this week? Had any of those negative thoughts so far since Sunday? So pretty much for the last 5 years, April 5th, almost to the date, 5 years ago, was like a milestone moment in my life after battling a severe darkness and depression that I didn't know if there was any way out of, that I finally experienced a peace with God and a freedom I had never felt before. But a lot of it centered around spiritual warfare and winning that spiritual battle that we read so much about in the Bible, and Paul wrote about, right? Especially in Ephesians 6, putting on the armor of God and going to battle and going to war. And so anyway, I just continue to try to just learn as much as I can, because as my eyes have been open to it and to the battle and the battle that was going on within me and the peace and the freedom that I've been experiencing, I'm becoming more and more aware of other people that are having the same battles, and it's like they see no way to win. So anyway, I've been reading a new book on spiritual warfare, but talking about just some of the voices that people hear. And it says, from their tormented perspective, they are fearful, angry, lonely, lost, losers, spiritual shipwrecks, damaged goods, stupid, faithless, fat, ugly, unlovable, unable to love, too stupid to understand their Bibles, and as they have heard so often, it will never change because God no longer loves them if He ever did in the first place. And the pastor that wrote this book says this is a lot of people that sit in sanctuaries on Sunday after Sunday, hear these voices and have these thoughts from the enemy. And it's a sad reality. That's the voices people are hearing. And then in connection with the sermon on Sunday, Neil Anderson, who's wrote several books on identity and freedom in Christ, he said that Neil Anderson said the number one offender he encountered in his work with demonized individuals, and I know that's a very strong word, was a conscious refusal to forgive others. So like the number one thing that has caused people to be in whatever state or voice that we just, read earlier is because they haven't forgiven somebody. So there's always a way that the door has been opened, that the enemy has come in. You remember when Cain, go all the way back to Genesis, and remember when Cain was upset because God didn't accept his offering? And God was like, why are you pouting? Basically, right? And what did God tell Cain? Sin lies where? Sin lies at the door. But you don't have to open the door. And so many ways we have opened the door, and a lot of people unknowingly have opened the door and have allowed the enemy in. I liken it, also to this. If we're home, if Glenda and I are home, and we want you to know we're home, our garage door will be open. If we're home, I'm letting out a little secret. Sorry, Mama. It's not always true. Yeah. If we're home, we're home. But anyway, if we're home and the garage door's open, there's kind of, it doesn't matter how windy it is, there's this little draft out in the driveway, and guess what comes into the garage? Yeah, the leaves and, all the little dust bunnies or whatever it is circling around. So you can go out there, you can go out there and you can take the broom and you can sweep them and you can get them to the edge of the garage. But you know what happens as you get closer and closer to the opening? They start swirling around and they start blowing back in, and then they start diving over this way in the corner. It's like, no, we don't want to leave. We don't want to go. Exactly, Judy. Close the door. And so many people in their life, the reason that they're hearing the voice of the enemy and they're oppressed by the wicked one is because they haven't shut the door. And so anyway, books like this and Victory Over the Darkness and Bondage Breaker, it helps people shut the door. It helps people shut the voices off. Now, as you probably are well aware of, they don't always completely go away. They get mad when they get locked out. They get upset when the door gets shut on. And so Satan, as Scripture will say very often, is very deceptive, right? And he has many devices. And if you kick him out one way, he's crafty and he'll try to come in another way. So that's why Paul says we don't need to be ignorant of his devices. He has several. David literally has people saying things and trying to do things. We don't have that, but we do have the voices, some more than others. But that's the battle many people face. And David says they bring down trouble upon me, and in wrath they hate me. But David says they're hunting me down. What did Peter say about Satan? He's like a roaring lion doing what? Seeking whom he may devour. And Satan will tell many people, you'd be better off dead. It would be good just to go ahead and take your life. Be easier on you and everybody else. It will stop the pain. And many people listen to that voice, sadly. And so these expressions of David are, if you think about it from the standpoint of like, well, no, I don't really have anybody chasing me down, but there are people living in this kind of fear, and they fill churches Sunday after Sunday, looking for a way out, looking for a way to stop the voices, looking for a way to get out of this bondage, and they don't know how, and they're told, and it's not necessarily wrong. They're told like, well, are you reading your Bible? Are you praying? Are you going to church? Yes, I'm doing all those things, I've said the sinner's prayer 1,000 times, and they won't stop. So anyway, it's that's what I want us to understand. It's a real thing for many people. And he's in mental anguish. His heart is hurting. He's afraid for his life. And notice what he says in verse 6. Oh, that I had wings like a dove, I would fly away and be at rest. Have you ever just wanted to run away from all your problems and disappear? Would I be the only one to raise my hand? I got one more that's honest, and one's kind of half honest. Have you ever felt like, sure we have in some, I wish I could just fly away. I wish I could just run away. There was somebody else that ran away, wanted to run away, and did run away in the Bible. Elijah ran away, didn't he? I mean, dude, ran. He didn't run just 3 days. He ran 30 days. He was like, I'm getting out of here. But at the end of those 30, 40 days, I don't know how long it was. It was a long time. Who did he run into? He ran into God, right? Because, he's there no matter where we go. And God's like, well, what are you doing here? Do you not know what I'm doing here? Come on, is it not? And David's just like, I just wish I could just run away. I just wish I could fly away. And he's like, I wish I could just fly away and be at rest. When he says that, he's saying, it's an expression of, I wish I could go back. I wish I could just go back to the days when I was a teenage boy tending the sheep, to the simple life. No problems. Nobody chasing me. Nobody hunting me down. Nobody trying to kill me. Nobody trying to betray me. Have you ever wanted just to have a simpler life before? Be a lot less problems. I think it was Nick Saban that said, he said, if you want to make everybody happy, don't be a leader. Sell ice cream. It's the only way to make everybody happy. And you've probably served in some kind of leadership capacity to know that it's like when you're low man on the totem pole or whatever, and you're just like, doing the simple stuff or whatever, and it's like, nobody's fussing, nobody's yelling, nobody's trying to take over anything like that. You're just doing their thing, and you kind of maybe work your way up, and you finally get in a higher position. You get a little more responsibility, take on a little more, got people working for you or whatever doing, and then it's like, I don't want this. I just want to run away. I'd rather wander off, just like David says. I would wander far off and remain in the wilderness. You know what's not in the? You know who is not in the wilderness? People are generally not in the wilderness. That's what he's saying. I want to get away from people. I just want to. I wish I could just go back to the simple life. But now here's the thing. Yes, David at times would have to take opportunity to remove himself from Jerusalem and, seek refuge and rock fortresses and stuff like that. But he was not running away. Does that make sense? I mean, there are measures sometimes that you have to take in order to secure your safety. But David was not one who was just, I'm done. You want it? You can have it. I'm gone. He wasn't taking that at it. But he's expressing honestly, I'm that afraid. So then the anger kind of takes over. And in verse 9 through 15, he says, destroy, O Lord, and divide their tongues. For I have seen violence and strife in the city. Day and night they go around it on its walls. Iniquity and trouble are also in the midst of it. Destruction is in its midst. Oppression and deceit, do not depart from its streets. For it is not an enemy who reproaches me, then I could bear it. Nor is it one who hates me, who has exalted himself against me, then I could hide from him. But it was you, a man my equal, my companion and my acquaintance. We took sweet counsel together, and we walked to the house of God in the throng. Let death seize them. Let them go down alive into hell. For wickedness is in their dwellings and among them. Now that verse 15 is one verse mainly that some scholars don't think he's talking about Absalom. Because why would you say that about your son? But to go ahead and speak to verse 15 real quick, David's not saying, I want to kill him. I want him to go to hell. What he's saying, basically, he's leaving it to God. He's saying, you, as he's done so often, he's leaving them in God's hands. God, you deal with them. You know, he's left the vengeance to God. And so go back to verse 9, and what is he saying there by when he says divide their tongues? Does anybody know what that means? I was kind of confused a little bit about it at first when I read it, but what is he saying there? Confuse their plans. In other words, let's just say, well, no, but none of you all would. I can't use that. I was going to say you all were no, nothing new, right? But it would be like, if you say, okay, how can we get him? What can we do to take him down? And John might be like, well, we need to do this. And then Mitch would be like, no, that's not a good plan. We need to do this. And then Katie might be like, no, y'all are crazy. We need to do this. That's what he's saying. Don't let them land on one thing. Don't let them be in agreement. Keep them confused. Let them all think, no, that's not right. That won't work. No, we need to do this. And they'll never agree on anything. So divide their tongues. Keep them confused. And so what David is saying is, he said, I have seen what is happening is there's violence and strife in the city. Day and night, they go around it on its walls. They, when he says, who are the they? Who's he talking about? He's talking about people, invaders that are on the outside. But he said it's not just people on the outside. It's iniquity and trouble are also in the midst of them. So there's wickedness within the city. He said it's everywhere. It's inside, it's outside, it's all around. It's falling apart. Destruction is in its midst. He said this is not accomplishing what you thought it would accomplish. You thought you would be better. And it's not. That's why that's part of his anger, is it's not that you're just coming at me. It's not that you're just trying to take me down. He said, but this is destroying the whole city. Now that's what's got him upset. And then of course, verses 12 through 14 is just like, we went to church together, he said. And so it's, that's pretty self-explanatory. We took sweet counsel together. We had good times. How did it get to this? He's trying to understand. So then, as he closes from verse 16 to 23, he begins to express his faith in God and the assurance he has in him. So verse 16, as for me, basically he's kind of like, hey, you're doing what you're doing. You're going to do what you're going to do. But as for me, he said, I'm going to call upon God. That's who I'm going to go to. And the Lord shall save me. Evening, morning, and at noon, I will pray and cry aloud, and he shall hear my voice. Do you know why he says evening, morning, and noon? Why didn't he say morning, noon, evening? Any ideas? Ooh, things seem worse in the dark. That's good. I don't know if it's exactly what he meant or not, but that's good. It's a very true statement, right? Kind of in the daylight, you've got your bearings, right? And so it's like, hey, I can see, I can navigate, I can kind of know, but when it gets dark, you don't know what's out there. I heard one commentator say that was their cycle. That's how they cycled through their days. Our days We start in the morning, right? And we go to evening. They started in the evening. They went from evening to evening. When was Shabbat? Friday night to Saturday night. So when he says evening, morning, and noon, he's just saying that's our cycle. That's our daily cycle. But so what he's saying is, I'm calling out to God throughout the day, and talking to Him. I pray and cry aloud, and He shall hear my voice. He has redeemed my soul in peace from the battle that was against me. So what is he saying? Yeah, there's fighting and stuff going on around me, but I'm at peace here in my heart and in my mind. For there were many against me. God will hear and afflict them, even he who abides from old, because they do not change. Therefore, they do not fear God. So basically, that's an expression of they're not learning. They're not learning from their mistakes. They're not learning from their evil. They're not wanting to change. And you have known people like that as well, right? They just don't want to change, do they? They just want to stay. They just want to stay that way. They may say at times, yes, we want to change, but they don't really want to change. So they refuse to change their ways. He has put forth his hands against those who were at peace with him. He has broken his covenant. Basically, he's talking about, being betrayed by friends and, broken promises. The words of his mouth were smoother than butter, but war was in his heart. Verse 21, his words were softer than oil, yet they were drawn swords. So basically, the words of he was saying one thing in his mouth, but he knew their heart was, there was war in his heart. Then he says in verse 22, and this is one you can carry with you anywhere, no matter what's going on. Cast your burden on the Lord, and he shall sustain you. He shall never permit the righteous to be moved. But you, O God, verse 23, shall bring them down to the pit of destruction. Bloodthirsty and deceitful men shall not live out half their days. In other words, they die young because of the evil and wicked way that they live. But David says, I will trust in you. So, in one of the commentaries I was studying, it was talking about when you look at the Psalms, it's always good to look and say, okay, how does this relate to Jesus? So there are 3 ways that was pointed out about how this relates to Jesus. So David was saying that basically he was hated without a cause, right? There wasn't a real reason for the people to be mad at David. So was Jesus not also hated without a real cause? Yeah. David expressed having wanted to escape from his troubles. Could Jesus have escaped from his troubles if he had wanted to? Remember, he said, I could call down what? 10,000 angels. We'd take care of this thing really quick. But he didn't. He could have, but he didn't. And then David expressed being betrayed by a companion. Jesus was also betrayed by somebody very close to him. So, I think a good way to transition to our prayer time tonight would be verse 22. Cast your burden on the Lord, and he shall sustain you. He shall never permit the righteous to be moved. So, not just a time to cast your burdens to the Lord, but a time also to